Okay, so today is Thursday, the 24th of September 2020, and I'm over in my hangar, and I just got the new components to run our second test here today. So the other video ended with me testing these external valves, and we did not have a satisfactory test with those, and it turns out that although those valves are considerably cheaper than these new ones that we're about to test, their cracking pressure was at least 2 psi, and it turned out that that was too much, that the generator would starve because of the vacuum that had built up, and that would happen at less than a 2 psi differential, so these valves would never open up and vent the internal tank. So now what we're going to do is replace those, and you see the little brass nipple here and the black valve beside that. That valve cracks at 0.33, a third of a psi, and the other one over here cracks at 1 psi. So of course the other one's quite a bit neater there, so I'm hoping that the 1 psi tests okay for us, but of course we're going to check both of them. So there's the number 2 valve unscrewed from its cap. You can see it looks like they had some kind of red sealant on the bottom of it, and you can see down inside the cap there's a very small hole drilled in the bottom of the threaded hole, and that's what goes all the way through the cap to serve as a vent. Just a little Teflon tape around the bottom of the this is the 1-inch cracking pressure valve, and you can see that the arrow is pointing down inside the cap, so that's the proper orientation. And there you go, the 1-inch cracking pressure valve is screwed in. Put a little Teflon tape on it and hand started it. It went right in, real nicely threaded, and then used a 9/16 inch wrench to finish the tighten down. Well, we have a bit of a problem here with our 1/3 psi valve. It interferes with the quick disconnect brass fitting there, so it won't screw on to the nipple. The nipple, I put some Teflon tape on it and it screwed right in, no problem, but the valve interferes with the quick disconnect. So I think what I'm going to have to do is go get a 45 or a 90 degree nipple there to turn this sideways to be able to get the valve on, of course just for testing purposes. We certainly wouldn't sell it like that, but we just to test whether we need to go down to that 1/3 psi cracking pressure or not. Okay, so just real quick, we had to run to Home Depot and buy a street elbow for our check valve so that we could screw it in. We had to take out the quick disconnect fitting here and then screw in our nipple with the street elbow on top, and then screw in our check valve so it's turned 90 degrees so it won't conflict with our other part there. Well, this still isn't going to work. I'm going to have to go back to the parts store and get a nipple that's long enough so that I can screw my quick disconnect fitting into the top of the cap, and then screw the nipple on way up on top there. So I'm going to have to go get like a 4 or 5 inch nipple that will allow me to turn this on top of the quick disconnect. Okay, so you can see what our fix was there. We went and got a 4-inch nipple to raise the valve so far above the quick disconnect that they no longer conflict with each other. So just a quick note here to show that all of the tanks are pretty much full. That generator is right up to the bottom of the filler neck. That one's about halfway up the filler neck. That one is kind of at the bottom of the filler neck, and that one is actually right up to the top of the filler neck as we start our test. We're going to do it the same way we did last time. We've got the generators hooked up in parallel, and they're going to be running a 1500 watt electric heater. You can see it's just a little wet under the caps there, and that's because I pumped the squeeze bulbs on both external tanks really hard to make sure we had a good siphon going, no air in the lines, and I pressurized the tank, and I didn't have the caps screwed down good, so we got a little seepage around the threads there, but then I tightened up the caps real good, and we don't have any seepage at all. Okay, so both generators cranked right up. They're both running. They both have their electronic speed controls on. I'm going to give them a little bit of a load here. So they ought to be pulling about 1500 watts between them. That ought to be a nice load on both of them. And it is now about 4:25 on Thursday the 24th of September. So we're going to just let them run overnight and see how they do. Running that just a little hotter this time. I'm running it on 3. You can see both of the lights are illuminated on the heat. Okay, so it's about 9:30 on Friday the 25th of September, and here's our first tank. The level is right about here, so it burned about half of this external tank's fuel, and this is connected to the brass external valve with the 1 psi cracking pressure. The other one didn't burn nearly as much. The 1/3 cracking pressure valve only burned well, it's right about even with the seam on the fuel tank there, so about an inch less of the external fuel. So it certainly didn't burn all of the external fuel. Just to continue, so we didn't burn all of our external fuel. This is the cap with the 1 psi cracking pressure, and both of the generators have about the same amount of fuel in them. The fuel level is just below the little red ring. This is our 1/3 cracking pressure cap, and the fuel level is almost exactly the same. So excuse me, it kind of appears that it's same deal. It probably created a vacuum that starved the carburetor for fuel, and it didn't crack open the valve and vent the internal tank, so the generator died. Just a quick final note, I did notice that both of the valves had just a little bit of water in them. This 1 psi external valve had, it could have been fuel or water, but it was just, there was a little bit of fluid in the top of the valve. When I took the cap off, I poured out a little bit of fluid, and it was probably after the generator shut down, probably a little bit of rain got in there, and it was kind of the same for over here. I actually had this one sitting under the gas cap to make sure that rain wouldn't flow directly into the valve, because it's got a little bit larger opening, and it had actually a bubble in the top of the valve, so it had a little bit of fluid up there to be able to form that bubble in the very top of the valve.